All right, so welcome to the academic conference, Safeguarding Press Freedom Amidst Journalistic and Safety Perspectives from Academia. It's held within the framework of the commemoration of World Press Freedom Day, headed by UNESCO 2024, and whose headquarters are in Santiago, Chile. On behalf of the host universities of this event, Universidad de Chile and Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, we welcome you. We remind those who want to ask questions to the exhibitors that they must write them on the papers and the folders and give them to our assistant, Matias Torre. We are going to begin the panel titled Challenges of Journalism Education and the Future of Journalism in English-Speaking West Africa. We are here today with Professor Umaru Pate, Professor Kwame Karikari, Dr. Gifty Appiah-Adjei, Professor Cecil Blake joining us from Sierra Leone, Mr. Dapo Olorunyomi joining us from the United States of America. Mr. Dapo Olorunyomi is a Nigerian journalist, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Premium Times, an online Nigerian newspaper. He's also the chief executive officer of the Center for Journalism Innovation and Development. He had worked earlier as an editor of Radio Nigeria and the African Guardian. Professor Cecil Blake is the former chair of the Department of Africana Studies and the Department of Communication at the University of Pittsburgh. He has also served as chair of the Communication Department at Indiana University. He once served as Minister of Information and Broadcasting and Chief Government Spokesman in Sierra Leone. He also held senior research and administrative positions in Africa and Asia. Dr. Gifty Appiah-Adjei is a senior lecturer and the adjunct general head of the Department of Journalism and Media Studies in the School of Communication and Media Studies at the University of Education, Winneba, Ghana. She has served as a graduate coordinator for the School of Communication and Media Studies from 2020 to 2021, and the examinations officer of the Department of Communication and Media Studies from 2019 to 2020. She has extensive connection with the media in Ghana. Professor Kwame Karikari is the former executive director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. He was for several years a professor in journalism at the University of Ghana. He has been involved in training journalists in several countries in Africa over the years. Prior to that, and during all those years, he practiced as a journalist, including serving as Director General of the Public Ghana Broadcasting Corporation in the early 1980s. Last but not least, Professor Umaru Pate is the Vice Chancellor of the Federal University, Kashere, Kwame, Nigeria. He is the current President of Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria. He has served as a Director of the Global Network for UNESCO Communication Professors. He has delivered new papers in previous UNESCO's World Press Freedom Days, academic conferences in Finland, Indonesia, and Uruguay. To all of you, welcome. Journalism is in transition all over the world. The information revolution and development of the internet has given birth to a powerful and pervasive system of communication with profound impact across boundaries of time, space, status, etc. These developments have created limitless opportunities, affected roles, and caused difficulties and uncertainties in journalism and the media industry, nationally and internationally. In West Africa, these changes are hugely felt as manifested in the emergence of new technologies, rise of new owners and players, changing media consumption habits of the audience, credibility challenges, and decline in revenue earnings from the traditional sources. Furthermore, the rise of the digital media, as well as West Africa's recent history of intermittent military coups, violent extremism, and destructive activities of foreign actors, compounded by rising poverty levels, have significantly affected the trust of citizens in journalism and its products, resulting in delegitimization or subversion of independent professional journalism. The consequences are limitations of free expression, poor accountability in governance, and weak participation in the democratic system. Thus, in this presentation, the panelists are expected to review the current state of journalism training and research across West Africa, with particular reference to the English-speaking countries of Ghana, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. They're expected to review the past and present and project into the fate of journalism training and research as they adjust to address the evolving realities in the sector, particularly regarding aspects of professional safety. In reviewing the broad landscape of safety protocols affecting journalism in Nigeria, Ghana, and Sierra Leone, this presentation will reestablish the case for conflict-sensitive reporting and consideration of professional safety as fulcrum for democracy building and the restoration of principles of liberty in fragile states threatened by insurgency, war, corruption, and poverty. First of all, we have several questions, but what is the general state of journalism in West Africa? Mr. Dapo.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to wish compatriots all over the world happy World Press Freedom Day. I think from the perspective of a professional, and as you can see, our panel is really a mix of professionals and intellectuals, academics. I would say that the professional landscape today is one of a bit of a struggle that is trying to catch up with the implications of the transition to the state of digital. And for this reason, you'll have evidence of weakness. However, this is also a media that has transited in the past probably 3 decades in regions that have moved from mostly authoritarian regimes to new democracies and are struggling. And for that reason, you see a growth of investigative traditions. You see a growth of data journalism, a growth and evidence of solutions journalism, and new kinds of products that are emerging. I think increasingly there's also evidence of product development within the media itself. I think for this reason, we are at a very transitional stage where you could say that it is a weak past and a welcoming future, and the evidence of those two divides are so evident in our media. Well, that's at the professional level, and which again is mirrored. But I think I'll have to give attention to those who are within the academic community to speak how this is reflected in the training and academic institutions of our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's interesting. You mentioned weak past and welcoming future, which is actually a bit linked to what is the current state of journalism education in English-speaking West African countries, Professor Blake, considering this promising future?
Really, I hope you're hearing me. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, very good. This topic is of particular interest against the backdrop of what is going on presently and how, within the international system and how that will impact upon journalism. First and foremost, we have a situation in which even though we have right now a multipolar global system, the international system, of which UNESCO is a very important part, operates on a uni-ideological framework. Now, what do I mean by that? The international organizations have all somehow adopted one ideological perspective. And so when we talk about training journalists, how do we deal with the challenges of having journalists to recognize that they live in a multipolar world, but then the values that are being pushed seem to come from a unipolar perspective? Now, why do I say that? I am very much interested in cultural communication, intercultural communication, international communication. And let's hypothetically say that there is a problem to report on that involves clashes in cultural values, cultural orientations, etc. So the threat posed really on the journalist, if that person has conflicting cultural or normative perspectives on that given topic, his or her freedom is constrained because we are now in a way that we should only see the world through one lens. You can see that even with financial lending institutions, that if you do not subscribe to those values enunciated and propagated by these institutions, be they financial institutions, be they donor countries, be they donor agencies, you are really caught in a quagmire because you are not free to look at these things objectively because of the fear of being reprimanded. And as all of us know, sitting here right now, countries are being threatened in terms of even international loans that refuse to accept or operate by those norms pushed by the international system. So the challenge I would have in a classroom is how do we negotiate these conflicts in reportage, in reporting issues, without compromising our values? I mean, this really is something that we do not tend to pay too much attention to because we simply go by the flow. I've participated in numerous meetings on the ethics and things like that. And all of these things seem to be rooted in one normative system. So as these countries, particularly in the Africa region, as they begin to raise questions about that relationship, whereby if you enunciate or report things contrary to those systems that are now being pushed, I mean, normative systems, then how do we say that people are free? So the very concept of freedom is really, to my mind, being compromised because you are free only to the extent that you're within a given ideological framework. So domestically, you can get it in trouble. Internationally, you can get it in trouble. So it's that kind of quagmire that I hope somehow our curriculum will be able to fashion content that will help journalists how to negotiate without them feeling as if their own freedom is compromised or even threatened if they do not write in a particular way. So this to me really is an issue. And I hope somehow the panel will be able to help me in seeing how to negotiate this against the backdrop of freedom, because the freedom is not just restriction domestically, it's restriction and sanctions internationally if the normative system being pushed internationally is not adhered to. So for now, that's my take, and I hope we'll be able to deal with that as we address curricular challenges and as we also address policy challenges.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's interesting you mentioned one lens and this fear and how do we negotiate with this normative system regarding that the very concept of freedom is at stake. Could you elaborate a little bit on that specifically?
Okay, I think I tried to go around it, but let's say that, I went to UNESCO. Let me just give an example. I went to UNESCO a couple of years ago, okay? And I am extremely interested in looking at alternative African futures, okay? Now, when you look at alternative African futures, immediately one thinks about looking at possible ideological scenarios. What I got out of UNESCO, and this is something I paid out of my pocket because I was trying to see if UNESCO is interested. What I got out of UNESCO was, Professor Blake, what perhaps you should be looking at is how to strengthen democracy. I got that bluntly from UNESCO. So here are people, there are young people who are raising questions. There are young people who are looking at the threats and sanctions against governments that do not seem to want to just accept. So the freedom of that young person is challenged because he either accepts or she accepts it, or he or she doesn't function. So we have to have a conversation with the international system, those of us in education, those of us in policy formulation. How do you address this quagmire? Because it's a different situation right now, where the level of consciousness is rising in the Southern Hemisphere. It's no longer a situation where you simply accept. You raise questions. You think critically. And that should not be seen as being anti-this or anti-that.
Thank you.
Do you see what I'm driving
Yes,
at?
thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm very interested in all of this. So just the fact about raising questions leads me to our next question to Professor Karikari regarding what are some of the main issues in journalism, education, practice, and professional safety for journalists in West Africa regarding this raising of questions in a way.
I think when Dapo was speaking, he raised the fact that there has been in West Africa a growth in media, the media landscape, the industry. There had been markedly what one might call some progress in the practice of journalism, especially from the early 1990s onward. But what is also real is that there is a decline in all of these, this environment generally, and in practice in so many ways. There is a decline in the industry in the sense that traditional newspapers, for instance, are suffering a lot. All of newspapers in the region are having a very hard time. And Dapo also raised the question of the challenge of the transition to new technologies. That is also quite a real issue. There is also the challenge on the ground of the economics of the media industry. This has been accentuated by the giant social media owners capturing advertising, for instance. More and more advertising are going away from traditional media to social media and other areas, and that's also hurting the industry. Then you also add what we observe in West Africa generally as a decline in the democracy that we thought had been ushered in, that is basically constitutional democracy based on multi-party systems of politics. That is also declining very tragically. All of these combined put pressure on not only the journalism industry practice, but also the training of journalists. For instance, I can say, at least in Ghana here, that more and more students are moving away from registering for courses in newspaper journalism, for instance. Not many students nowadays would register for a course in newspaper reporting and so on. More and more students are looking out to areas of communication such as public relations, advertising, and so on. And this is because of a number of factors. One, the industry, which is not attractive. The rewards. I mean, if you work in journalism, you don't really get paid. You know, there's no lucrative attraction to join the journalism industry. So more and more students are rather preferring to go into other areas of communication. All of these, I think, put pressure on the teaching of journalism in our schools. But besides this, I think Prof. Blake is making some very important points about the global ideological environment for the teaching of journalism. But let me also add some cultural dimensions. How do we train journalists in foreign languages, in English, to go and work in environments where the people don't speak those English languages? In other words, the basic communication activities of the majority of the people take place in our local indigenous languages. Yet we train journalists, communicators at the university level in English or French or Portuguese, for that matter. So that contradiction is something to seriously, think through. But it also goes to say that much of our media, apart from radio, operate in the foreign languages. So really, what is journalism for if it is so alienated from the people? I'm raising this to point out some of the contradictions that need to be analyzed if we are going to make progress in the teaching or training in journalism in this era. So we have the problems of technological transition. We have problems of cultural essence. We also have problems of the political environments that are declining and are creating more conditions of insecurity for journalists. For instance, in countries like Nigeria and Ghana, there's a drastic decline in investigative journalism, for instance, because investigative journalism attracts very drastic repercussions from the powers that be. So if you are a lecturer in journalism, what is the challenge for you? How do you inspire young people to venture into areas that are not welcome in the larger political environment? In other words, my concern is the political environment, the cultural environment of training in journalism, undertaking journalism. What kind of curriculum do we develop that can respond to these issues when we know that the politics of the societies are not in the hands of academics? So how can we be effective? In any case, why must we train journalists who will not find jobs that will give them enough for their daily existence? These are very critical questions. The details of curriculum and so on can be discussed at another level or by others, but I'm saying that the environment, just as Professor Blake raised, the environment of training journalism is quite complicated and complex.
Thank you. That raises a lot of issues regarding media landscape, media industry, and how to re-enchant students with the work, the journalism practice. And I would like to ask Professor Pate, how are journalism schools in West Africa adapting to the changing media landscape and preparing students for the digital age?
Thank you very much. Like my earlier speakers mentioned, there are changes politically as well as in the media landscape of the various West African countries. And the journalism schools have taken some initiatives to respond to some of these changes. With the growth of with the birth of the internet and the development of information and communication technology, as rightly noted, remarkable progress have been achieved in the development of the sector. However, there are also significant challenges that have come up, which we have taken note of. The issue of funding, the issue of technology, the issue of content creation, issue of credibility, issue of safety and freedom for journalists. These are key fundamental pillars of journalism. And we've taken note of that. For example, in Nigeria, there are also compounding issues of terrorism, of violent crimes, and issue of accountability because of the rise in corruption, in governance. So all these issues affect the performance of journalists. And we have taken note of all of that in retraining and training of journalists. So in Nigeria, for example, what we did was to undertake a comprehensive review of the journalism training curriculum in the country. And what did we do? We took note of all of these things and came up with courses that are quite sensitive in addressing the challenges of society in relation to the issues that I've talked about. For example, issue of funding. We have now introduced courses in media economics and management in all our journalism schools to ensure that students are also equipped with the knowledge and skills in being able to raise money for the survival of media organizations. The issue of technology. These technologies, we do not manufacture them, we have to import them, and you cannot talk about bringing them in when the funding is very, very scarce or is very challenging. And you know why the funding is challenging? There are emergence of new media owners, smaller bureaucracies, and giving a very hot competition to the conventional media organizations. Because of that, getting money becomes a very, very serious challenge, and getting money, and that affects the entire spectrum of the business. So issue of technology, we have to also think of how we can mainstream these technologies into our business, and how we can also train students that understand and can use these technologies to be able to promote the business of journalism within the democratic context. The next one is the issue of content. Content is what connects the audience with the media. If the content is poorly produced or is not creatively produced, nobody attends to it. And there are so many content producers, citizen journalists, and so many others that it subverts sometimes the business of the original conventional journalists. Again, you have to train students who can respond to these challenges. The third issue of the issue of credibility. Credibility talks about issue of truthfulness, issue of relevance, issue of dynamism and competence. And with the era of the internet and now the AI and all the gadgets available, there are challenges regarding disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, rumor, fake news, hate speech, all over the place. And all of this within the context of a multicultural community like Nigeria or West Africa, it becomes very, very challenging. So we have to retrain our journalists on issues relating to fact-checking, on issues of being able to handle information in such a way they can attract the audiences away from the alternative sources, and all of that. And this requires a lot of training, a lot of orientation, and a lot of skills for them to compete with all these sources of information. Like we said today, we have abundance of information and scarcity of attention. Then the next level of challenge is that of safeguarding the freedom and safety of journalists. In our environment, there are a lot of challenges impacting on the performance of the journalists. And if you remember the UNESCO list of safety of journalists, issues relating to psychological safety, physical safety, economic safety, gender safety, online safety, and all the other safeties. So you could see how, despite the expansion in the business of journalism, how journalists are suffering because of terrorism, because of military coups in various countries, because of violent crimes, and because of the poverty in the industry. All of these are impacting on the safety of journalists. They work without being paid. They're psychologically harassed daily by different sources in society, and nobody is punished for all of that. So we are also strengthening the teaching of safety. All these things have been mainstreamed into our curriculum now, using the UNESCO model curriculum on how do we strengthen the awareness, the knowledge, and the capacity of journalists that are working, as well as those that are being trained to be able to engage in investigative journalism, report issues that may be considered as risky, and yet be able to survive without necessarily being hindered. So I think these are some of the ways by which various countries and universities in the West Africa sub-region have been addressing the emerging challenges and responding to the issues so that they become relevant, and journalists that are trained can also become competitively relevant for their countries and as well as for humanity.
Thank you so much for this answer. It's interesting to wonder how to work with algorithms as well to enhance the performance of journalism and basically prepare students for that future. I would like to ask Dr. Appiah, what are the most important skills and knowledge that journalism students in West Africa need to acquire to succeed in the evolving digital era?
Thank you very much. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I believe that students need digital skills, they need digital knowledge that will help them to navigate well in the evolving digital era, as well as to succeed in their careers. Now, by this, I'm making reference to the fact that they need digital skills that will enable them to apprehend and then be proficient in using digital technologies, in using digital tools and digital platforms that are revolutionizing the journalism practice. For instance, they will need knowledge and skills in producing multimedia content. They will also need knowledge and skills in effectively using content management systems and analytical tools in their journalistic routines. They also need digital skills that will enable them to collect, to interpret, to analyze, and to visualize data effectively to be able to uncover insightful stories, since we are in the era of big data. And then they also need exposure in ways that they can effectively leverage on opportunities from social media to source stories, to promote their content, and to sustain audience engagement. Now, aside from these digital technology knowledge and skills, they also need sound knowledge in ethics and then legal knowledge. So for us, navigating in these digital landscape is concerned, you realize that the current digital landscape offers vast opportunities that requires that ethical considerations are given to the use of these the digital technologies and platforms that we are talking about. For instance, we know that social media is more or less aiding the spread of disinformation. And so if we are going to train students to leverage on social media platforms and source stories and all that, then we also need to teach them how to fact check, how to verify information so that they don't end up misinforming people as a result of picking a disinformed source of information from the internet. Now, I also believe that students need knowledge and skills in entrepreneurial journalism and then collaborations, in the sense that the bubbling digital media landscape offers opportunity for students to go into journalism startups and sustain sustainable journalism ventures. So we need to train them on entrepreneurial journalism so that they can go into their own startups. And finally, the issue of collaboration, I'm making reference to collaborations within the country and then cross-border collaborations. So journalists in media organizations, so collaborations between media organizations, collaboration between journalists, between countries, so that when they can come out with impactful stories that will help sustain the journalism practice in West Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was wondering, before we give leeway to the questions of the audience, if going back to what Dr. Appiah mentioned about collaborations within the country and internationally for impactful stories, what role can local and international partnerships actually and collaborations actually play in supporting journalism education and safety in West Africa?
Thank you very much. I told you that in Nigeria we have been able to review our curriculum, and we did that in collaboration with internal and external partners. For example, UNESCO was involved, the MacArthur Foundation of Chicago was fully involved, several other international bodies, regulatory bodies, and then in Nigeria, we collaborated with the industry. For example, the Premium Times and many other media organizations, as well as regulatory agencies, all came together. We took a critical look at the landscape, as well as the content of what we have been teaching. And suggestions came from every quarter. Then we collated the ideas and came up with what we could now say is an acceptable curriculum that is designed to train the next generation of journalists in Nigeria, journalists who are equipped with the skills to undertake, for example, investigative journalism, who are well equipped with skills of handling digital equipment and can also understand their audiences and be able to raise revenue required to protect their safety, the safety of their equipment, the safety of the industry. Because as we always say, editorial independence determines, economic independence determines editorial independence. And once the newspapers or the media organizations are economically weak, it becomes difficult for them to become editorially strong, as well as having a staff that are confident and are also well protected. So a lot of efforts are being made to ensure that journalists themselves are safe. For example, this World Press Freedom Day is being used to raise the awareness and collaboration with relevant government agencies and also the industry to ensure that journalists are not subjected to impunity and do not suffer unnecessarily because of the work that they do. So a lot of other issues, I'm sure, are also being done. You'll hear them from the other speakers.
Let me add a couple of things to what Professor Pate has put forth. In Nigeria, as Professor Pate said, they have come out with a curriculum for journalism training, which is quite innovative and has also reflects the realities on the ground. And and promise also very innovative ways of improving journalism training. Now, I'm citing this example because of the question of collaboration. In Ghana here, we also have an association of communication scholars and educators. And we plan to collaborate with our Nigerian counterparts to see how best we can take a cue from the development they have made to also initiate ideas in Ghana here for revising or reforming the curriculum so that it will become more modern, forward-looking, and also responsive to the current challenges. Secondly, concerning safety of journalists, Professor Pate has given out a number of ideas concerning the training to equip both practitioners and students, and some tips about safety and so on. I think when it comes to collaboration and so on, one very important thing about journalism safety is solidarity across borders. If journalists have problems in Ghana, it is important that media or journalist associations elsewhere also come to their support, come to their aid by raising protests and so on and so forth. Another level of collaboration, I think it's Dr. Appiah-Adjei who was making the point, is about collaboration among media houses across borders. We have, as I said, a decline in investigative journalism in our region. But I think one way that we can go around this is if some sensitive investigative report has been done by a media house in Ghana and they cannot publish it, a media house in Nigeria must take it and publish it. Of course, the impact and repercussions will come back to the authorities who are being exposed in Ghana. In other words, we must strengthen collaboration across borders among training institutions, but also among the professionals in order to promote higher standards of training and also to promote safety for people in the industry.
Thank you. There was a mention regarding acceptable curriculum, and it links to one of the questions from the audience, which has to do with what is an acceptable curriculum and what themes and courses do you think are key to approach with students who are just beginning their first year of journalism?
Okay. I am of a view that journalism education is supposed to meet the needs of the industry and then the needs of a society. So that is to say that whenever we are putting together a journalism curriculum, then we should look out for the needs of an industry as well as the needs of a society. So, for instance, when Prof. Umaru Pate was speaking, he made reference to the fact that in Nigeria, for instance, they are contending with issues about terrorism, about violent crimes, and all that. So that is to say that in a society like this, when you are putting together a journalism curriculum, then definitely you need to pay attention to safety of journalists, as well as conflict-sensitive reporting, peace journalism, and all that, so that you equip students with their skills in this area. And whenever they are done and then they go onto the field and they are practicing, it puts them in a better position to be able to report what is happening within the society and bring about the needed change or impact, because such a person has been equipped with the necessary skills and knowledge about conflict sensitive reporting, about journalist safety and all that. So it makes such a person fit to be in the industry and then work effectively in order to make the desired impact that we are all expecting from journalists.
So how can journalism education in West Africa sufficiently prepare students to report on critical issues like military incursions, conflict, corruption, and human rights?
If you probably I can give a little perspective from the newsroom. I think first and foremost, it will help the practice of journalism if the academic wing of the profession help prepare students first to see journalism in the context of democracy building. That opens a totally new perspective when they are able to understand that journalism, qua journalism, as something just living in the sky. It's really, as an abstraction, it doesn't really cut it. For one, the society that this journalism will serve, it's in itself a living entity of the various social pools, political pools, and all the contradictions. And only when students are able to see that interconnection between, the goals and aspirations of journalism will they, I think, be able to sufficiently serve that community. And the missing link always I see is the inability of young and fresh graduates coming to the newsroom unable to see that connection between journalism and the democracy project. Second to this is the fact that if journalism will then serve that community very well, be it serve those gaps, either, the problem of helping to bring attention to, like in Nigeria, problem of terrorism or insurgency, or indeed, all across the sub-region, the problems of climate crisis, and so on, then they must see that journalism itself is able to survive. Professor Pate spoke earlier about the whole question of the broken business model of journalism. We see in the context of newsroom students who are coming into the profession a little bit unprepared to understand that journalism is, as much as it is indeed a social purpose, and very much so, also must contend with the fact that it must deal with the fact that for its own survival, its own sustainability, it must also function in the context of workable and living business models. So these two things, helping students to see that they've entered a profession that must survive to offer those social needs of the society, but in itself, as an enterprise, must successfully succeed as a business, then helps them, gives the confidence to address many of those issues that are missing, I think, in various communities. So that platform, therefore, I see is one area that we still need to do very important work about, in our journalism schools and getting students ready for the newsroom. Thank you.
Thank you. This links to, you mentioned this gap. How can we bridge the gap between journalism, education, and the safety needs of the industry in West Africa?
May I come in for a second, please?
Yes, please do, by all means.
Yeah. I'm in complete agreement with the pragmatic aspects that have been articulated. and I'm very conversant with the curriculum that was fashioned in Nigeria. In fact, Professor Pate invited me to many of those sessions. But what to my mind is a little bit puzzling is, yes, we can deal with all these pragmatic issues, things that are visible, things that are tangible, but it's the intangible aspects that of great concern to me. And among those intangible aspects, okay, is context. This is why I started by looking at the global context and how does that fit in. Let me give a specific example. Okay, I come from a country that we've been independent for 63 years. We just celebrated our independence. And we've been governed for most of those 63 years by the current global system. But after 63 years, really what is happening in Sierra Leone is frightening. Because if this is what the model yields, how do you train journalists to understand context, to raise critical issues? And this is where my concern is. We are not confronting that challenge of developing critical thinking and also letting actors within the environment recognize that freedom is not just from one side. People should also feel free to think and report without repercussions. And we tend to look at repercussions only domestically. But there are repercussions internationally. And you sensitize the students without compromising them. And for me, it's this context that is a little bit mind-boggling. I'm in total agreement with all of what has been said in terms of the logistics, media, digital stuff. Very much in agreement. But I'm not comfortable in addressing these issues within just one context. And what do I mean by that? I think it was Professor Pate who mentioned that within democratic context, the world is changing. And we have to let administrators, teachers, journalistic practitioners see that changing world and enable people to ask questions. Professor Karikari said, investigative journalism. Yes, I mean, that is the thing. But how can you just conduct investigative journalism within one ideological framework? And for me, that's the problem. Incidentally, I'm sitting in a building that is run by a Chinese organization. So just now I realized, my goodness, behind me, there's Chinese stuff. This building is run by a Chinese organization, okay? And it's showing the global changes that are occurring in this country and in this subcontinent. So these kind of intangible is the challenge. I know I go about it by addressing this for the first 3 weeks of any course that I teach. I address this aspect of what is going on globally, and then the rhetorical construction of the African. How do people see us? How do we present ourselves? Are we just trying to present ourselves in the image and likeness of the other? Or should we be able to present ourselves in what we conceive as our image and then negotiate? So I do that in a classroom. I think I have liberties on doing that because I'm in a classroom. I'm now retired, of course. But I don't just want us to get fixated with the tangibles, particularly from an academic perspective. How do we get to these young minds? I was sitting around the other day with somebody teaching at a tertiary level institution. And he said something that just boggled my mind. Oh, I was trained by a white man. I said, excuse me? What does that mean? You see, the mindset is, we cannot rule ourselves. We cannot train ourselves. And that figurative man is the international system that is telling us this is the way to do it, this is the way to do it, this is the way to do it, with little or no input from our own ideas of who we could be or who we should be without being locked into a straitjacket. Sorry, but for me, as I said, I'm retired.
Thank you.
Maybe I have the laxity in dealing with these things, but believe me, it boggles my mind.
No, I think globally,
Thank you.
when you mention understand context and critical issues or critical thinking, you also have to go back to how students today understand conflict, and that conflict to them is just what is happening at the moment for some of them, most of them. I have students who know very little about what happened in Rwanda or Guatemala or specifically even the Holocaust. So when you say this rhetorical construction, you also have to question yourself about how much you know, perhaps. We have the final 10 minutes. I would like to circle back to how can we bridge the gap between journalism education and the safety needs of the industry in West Africa?
Well, I think, first of all, there ought to be a conscious effort by academic institutions to work closely with the industry so that students will know that what they are being trained for or about is not abstracted from reality. I think also that it's important that there are occasional workshops or seminars with organizations that are working to promote press freedom, journalist safety, and even occasionally interactions with progressive members of the security agencies will be useful because there are many aspects of safety that journalism students ought to be exposed to so that they see the broad dimensions of what safety of journalists mean. For instance, cyberbullying, which predominantly focuses or targets female journalists, for instance. It's important so that students get to understand, for instance, the gender dimensions of issues like safety and how to handle all of such issues. So, first of all, fundamentally, there ought to be a conscious relationship with industry. There ought to be attempts, but in doing so, one must approach such issues in such a way that it does not frighten and turn off young journalists away from journalism, because journalism can be dangerous in many of our environments. Yet, journalism must continue, and whichever way we approach the question of safety in the classrooms, it must be to create skills and an understanding among these young people about how to protect themselves, what safety measures they should take, what risks they mustn't take, and how to protect sources, how to protect colleagues, and how to be committed to the profession without endangering themselves. One important reason why the classroom must work with the industry is so that the industry is also reassured from the perspective of academia that really they are not alone. Because a lot of time, the industry is not nurtured back from academia, and direct relationship with industry helps also academia to understand the practical realities that people are going through. Narratives by victims of certain abuses or certain acts of repression should be also brought into the classroom. So I think I'll end by saying that the best approach is to work with industry, to work with security agencies, and to keep updating the classroom or students, the new developments going on in protecting journalists against issues of safety.
Maybe just to add a word on what Professor
We have
Karikari
3
said.
more minutes, so
Oh, okay. So just
please go ahead.
the dimension of relating with civil society organizations is also very, very important. They can also help in a number of ways, like we have seen in Nigeria. Then the process of trying to embolden the young people to be able to use the legal system to confront some of the harassment and the attacks that come from various sources, either in power or out of power. These are all very, very important. And above all, economically empowering the journalists to be able to be above board and be able to address some of the basic issues relating to survival. Once the economic safety is very weak, it affects the psychological and sometimes the physical and all the other safeties. So we have to continuously encourage the issue of economic empowerment among professional journalists.
Thank you so much. Sadly, your time is almost up. So thank you to all the speakers on this panel. We must leave, and we thank the exhibitors and all those who have accompanied us both in person and remotely. We invite you to review the conference program and attend one of the interesting panels that follow. And thank you so much. Once again, this is such an interesting subject matter, and it has been a real pleasure to discuss this with you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.